The amazing thing is that we believe, the 5 people watching this video are going to believe we shot this on a different day when all we did was change our clothes and spin the apple around.
I can colorize it in post, make it look like an old-timey thing, so that it looks like we filmed this
100 years ago.
200 years ago. We're in the old West here with old Westgate.
Yeah, old Westgate here. The sheriff for these parts.
The worst accent. Worst. Welcome everyone to the Pat and Paul Show. My name is Paul Nicolati. I am joined as always by my co-host, Pat McLaughlin.
Hello.
Pat, I'm starting to get concerned that Ben Westgate
over here?
Westgate here has formed an unusual attachment to his apple. So we wanted to talk about, we talked to you last time you were here with your apple about in this room about iron and the talk that you're giving at Circuit. And there's, iron was sort of an answer to some of the problems or some of the hurdles that a front-end developer encounters in developing in the AEM ecosystem. And
on the build side of
things. Mm-hmm. And so, we wanted to talk again just in general about, what are a few of the problems that are common for front-end developers? What are some of the hurdles? What are some of the pain points?
I think in our last episode, Paul, you pointed out something really, really good, and that is on the back end of things, most things have been solved. There are patterns in place. But I think now on the front end, there aren't patterns yet. I mean, people are following certain patterns, but it still kind of is the Wild West as far as how to achieve authored scripts. And how to integrate very robust front-end designs with a content management system.
Right.
So, where do we want to start? I got a list.
Well, why don't you? We don't have note cards.
I don't have note
here.
Cards. So I was gonna say,
probably should have had note cards, but
You want to cut away?
No.
Some note cards being.
You want like a 20 to write some notes on?
I'd love a 20.
No, give us number one. Are they in any particular order?
I don't think they're in any particular order, especially not rage-wise.
Okay.
But here's an interesting one. With using very dynamic, asynchronous front-end frameworks, pulling dynamic data in and stuff, what are the challenges when it comes to indexing content so that it's searchable? What solutions have you had to do to ensure that all of the content on a page is indexed?
Yeah.
And now I think the solution that's probably both front end and back end.
And now when you're saying, you're talking about crawlable, you're talking about Google coming in.
I'm talking about two different things, I guess. It's indexed for search within your site, as well as HTML being crawlable for indexing in outside search tools.
Well, let's start with the outside search tools.
Okay. Your Googles and Bings. And
Yahoos.
Well,
Ask Jeeves.
Jeeves, son.
Yeah, Jeeves is.
He's still out there. He's doing the work.
Is he?
I think there's some form of him.
The best that we've been able to do on my current project is to kind of do a hybrid approach where the pieces that need to be extremely dynamic, we end up overwriting after the initial HTML load of the page with JavaScript, some JavaScript framework. In our case, it's React. But so we're taking the rendered HTML that React writes and kind of copying that into the JSP. And making that dynamic JSP spit out the right HTML so that when the search engines see it, it's crawlable.
So just to be clear, you are rendering the page
Yep.
with content in it,
Mm-hmm.
and then upon load or upon some action on the page, you are overwriting that content.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and it's a little tricky because sometimes, more often than not, that content will need to be changed right after load or things like that. And for this particular client, we needed to have it all on the page so that the search engines could see it, but then they didn't want it all to be displayed to the user. They only wanted the first 10 results to be shown. And so in order for that to happen, we had to instantly, as soon as JavaScript was loaded, take away every, the extra 500 results and just render those first 10.
Okay.
And so it's not a great solution, like I said, but it accomplishes both tasks. It's a little bit of an extra work to do it this way, but it seems to be the most seamless to have a great front end tooling to allow you to build these complex interactions and animations and such, while still having search engine searchability, crawlability. So
Now the script kiddies who promulgate things like React, I've heard them go bananas about this concept of, having this like dual purpose JavaScript logic where like React is actually able to do the rendering on the server side as well as suddenly take control of the rendered HTML once it hits the client side to sort of get around this issue.
Yeah.
Is that like even a viable path? Have you seen that? Not even in the context of AEM, but like, have you seen that in action?
In a node context, yeah.
Yeah, like in any context.
I've seen it in action, and it's not the silver bullet that it sounds like.
Yeah.
Because you have to just like anything, you have to make sure the data's there in time, and you have to get the server will have different methods for getting that data than the front end will, and things like that. And so it ends up, in my opinion, adding a lot more complexity to an application to try to write the same JavaScript or same code to deliver both the front end from the front end and the back end.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, we also tried to do something like that for AEM, and we got the beginnings of it working, but it was something like 100 times slower than regular JSP in its render time. So, of course, there could be optimizations done there, but
given the appropriate investment,
right?
Yeah.
But the amount of time required to do that hasn't been worth it yet.
Yeah.
For the added benefit of something that might not be worth it in the end anyways. So,
right. Now Google for a while had, and I think they still do, like there was some, I can't remember what they called it, but there was like a particular URL scheme where like if you supported this weird like hashbang fragment scheme or something, it basically let Google know, hey, this is a dynamic page, but if you visit this URL, that's going to be a static version of what's dynamic over here. So please go look at that for crawlability purposes.
Right.
Do you have any idea how, like, well, one, have you ever implemented that? And two, do you have any idea if that's supported by other search engines?
It's supported by Bing, and Bing has a similar URL structure. It's slightly different, and it may have changed. It was kind of hit or miss with Bing. Definitely Google has it completely documented and all that. And we tried it, and we ended up getting an implementation of Ghost up and running. So it would actually hit our server, render the JavaScript, and get the full HTML markup, and then spit that out to the whatever was indexing the site. But it was pretty slow, and required quite a bit of extra software to be installed on the actual server doing the actual box that was doing the serving of content and such. So not only would you have had to install AEM, but you would have to install Ghost and a few other things to get everything hooked up together.
But that was to avoid like trying to do duplicative code and like having JSPs that mirror what you're already doing.
Right, exactly.
In the JSX or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like in theory you could do that duplicative code and just have AEM render things differently if the request came in a certain way.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you could. So, and the search engines themselves are beginning to, like, we've had, we did that on a few of the pages that, for this particular client, that were really important to be indexed, and then some that weren't. And we've actually found that Google has indexed a few of the pages that are very heavily JavaScript rendered.
They'll let some of the script run, like to the extent that it can.
Right. And so we've been surprised. I shouldn't say I've been surprised with some of the results that are coming back from Google on those pages that we didn't do anything for. So
one point I have, and it's not really about search, would be you brought up an interesting point about talking about React and having React generate the markup both on the server side and then take over once you get to the client side. Mm-hmm. And I've always found Node.js as an interesting opportunity, unless it's outside of AEM, to share your business logic if it's written in JavaScript. So in a lot of disconnected applications that I've worked on, a lot of times they're done in a single page format out in a application, whether it's running in a Cordova or it's just running offline in a browser, and that you have to mimic a lot of the business logic both on the server side when you are connected and then in the application. Mm-hmm. So I've always seen Node.js as a way to do that, but I was wondering like your guys' comments on that, or if that actually is viable. I mean, do you see the ability to have classes, or a domain basically that exists on both sides?
I think that you like,
and think of Node.js not as rendering web pages as simply as your API. It's a series of web services that, the logic that you're applying out on the front end, say in disconnected mode, also needs to be applied at the service level.
Yeah, I've never done it because it always seemed like such a pain to think through up front. But like ostensibly, if you had, obviously you'd have to structure your script to work in those environments. Right. But like if your build process was such that, you modularized your business logic, and then on the client build side you were using like Browserify or something to jam everything together, and then on the server side you're obviously using Node and NPM to weave everything together. Like ostensibly, you could have a module or multiple modules of business logic that are shared, just in the API at that point that's shared between them. It then becomes a problem of, on the server side, is your business logic, like, it would have to be strictly logic, right? Like you couldn't be accessing databases or something.
No, right, and that's what I mean, like having that domain tier that strictly is a model of your system, both out, in the client and on the server side. It was just interesting because I had never thought of the other way of actually rendering it on the server side for searchability, and then still reusing a lot of the same code, if you will, out on the client to give a better experience. And I thought that was an interesting way to go about that.
Right.
But it sounds like it was not a valuable way to go in your experience.
Yeah. In my experience, it's harder than it can be worth it depending on what your use case is.
Right.
but you need the technologies in place to
Right.
be able to make it work.
Very cool. Yeah, next
Problem set.
problem set that I have is, and this is something we all fight.
These aren't personal. Are these just personal problems on your current project, or is this okay?
No, God, no. No, these are...
I'm not doing your homework for you, am I?
No. God, no. I wish my problem was sharing logic on a node server.
Yeah.
And
Real problems.
Yeah, and a disconnected client, trust me. Which takes me back to my Silverlight days when I used to do this with C#. That's why I was so excited about JS at the time. But let me get to it, and that is a simple problem, but with so many different solutions, I get lost in it, and that is, what are your recommendations for taking authored, I don't even want to say content, but authored data or authored information that is necessary to implement robust front-end solutions. But they need to be available in script without just having a series of global variables sitting in your page. What are some of the techniques you use there to organize it or to follow some kind of pattern that makes it maintainable?
Yeah, that's actually something that has been a major pain point since I started working with AEM, and I think that I found, Josh Zeltman and I.
Sorry, I'm going to say the name again.
Yeah, I'd have to have him sign off.
He'll sign off. This is an advertisement for his component he wrote that is open source now. That it will expect data to be written to the page in a certain way, and then it will scrape the page for it and put it in a structured object for you.
And now, why do it in that manner instead of using attributes in the markup? Is there any reason one way or the other to do that?
There are a few. I personally think that makes your markup a little bit more cluttered and less easy to read.
Mm-hmm.
I think that very often there's more data necessary to add to the component than makes sense to put in a data element on the element.
Would you say, would an argument for using a component like you've is because you can have more structured data, like you can have parent objects with child objects, and instead of just say strings that fit into an attribute?
Yes, absolutely. Because, for instance, we could have a list of stores, and all of those stores could then have attributes for themselves, and you could have that all written out to a JSON object on the page, rather than have to write that all out to an element in a data element. So that's one thing that has been super nice to have on this project that I'm on right now, because there are a lot of use cases for that, specifically where we want to be able to have the data on initial render of the page and render it as quickly as we can.
Gotcha.
And so it's been a nice way of doing that. And then also really nice to have some guarantees that it's always going to have every component that you need to have JavaScript for is going to have the same way of initializing itself and building it either in React or just native JavaScript with an init function.
Gotcha.
So that it's always passed the component data that AEM is passing to the front end via these tags, and then from there, any other specific application level data that maybe has been set by another component or something like that. And the complexity that can grow from there, it seems a lot more maintainable that way, rather than having these data chunks related to a specific element a specific element that DOM element rather than it's just a script tag. So
gotcha.
And that component that Josh wrote is called data-store, STOAR, on NPM. And you can grab that and...
So real creative guy, just terrible speller.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing there. Paul, what are your thoughts when it comes to passing data, authored data from AEM?
Well, I love data attributes.
I know you do.
But how do we feel about writing Sightly or JSP that produces JavaScript files?
Like,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I believe it's a necessary evil sometimes.
I personally, it irks me, but I haven't had to be on a project where it was necessary. So
'cause I've done it.
Yeah, I know you have. And I've voiced my opinion when you've done it. But
I'm not a huge fan of it, but using the standard sling mechanisms of selectors and extensions resolving to things, you can write a Sightly file that answers to a page's resource type called with a .js extension and produces JavaScript that then the production of that JavaScript has access to the resource tree of the page. It's not.
And I find that
it's not overwhelmingly elegant.
No, but your scripts can be more robust then because you don't have to pass everything in its arguments. Your arguments are then true arguments for each function or each method on that, say, JavaScript file, right? Instead of having to pass in a mess of 40 attributes, which to me becomes just as unmaintainable.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, as soon as you find yourself doing it, like, it's one of those times where you have to take a step back and make sure that, like, this is the best.
Right.
Like, am I completely misdesigning this solution? Like, have I totally gone off the reservation and, like, am now just hacking for the sake of getting something done? Yeah. Or,
so that's
like, does this make sense?
Of our job.
Does
hacking to get something done.
Does this make sense in the context that I'm working in?
I think it would be interesting to interview architects in the first 2 weeks of their project and in the last 2 weeks of the 9th month they've been working on it to see how their attitude has changed about things like that.
Yeah, you want to see want to see that idealism dwindle.
Oh yeah, it's gonna. Yeah, it's just interesting to say like that you're so beat down by the end that you're just just do it that way, whatever.
Right.
Like it's an interesting.
Yeah, code reviews really fall off.
Oh yeah,
after those first 3 weeks.
Yeah, because by that month, month 9, month 10, when you're in there. Everyone has so much to do. Code reviews aren't done anymore. They're just stamped. It's like a rubber stamp. Yeah. Does it work? Yeah. Fine.
Doesn't even matter if it works.
Yeah. As long as
there code?
Right. It's like as long as it doesn't break what I'm doing right now, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Did you break the build? I think is essentially becomes the code review.
Yeah. What are the challenges you see now in the front end game?
I think a lot of it is going from what I want to do is make it easier for front end developers to go from project to project to project and have some semblance of organization across those projects. And going back to Iron, that's what I'm hoping to do with that with Iron, and hoping to continue the learning process of making sure that front-end build tools are able to be used and frameworks are able to be used efficiently and in the right ways. But yeah, and I think the biggest problem that I've seen with AEM is that getting the data to the front end, and we've exhausted that topic at least for now.
Yeah, I think we all landed on data attributes.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Apples and data attributes. It's all you need.
I think there's an interesting problem in marrying the suite of tools that front-end developers have come to know and love with best practices in AEM, and like not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, to use a somewhat morbid locution, where there's you have to sort of understand both sides of it. You have to understand what this front-end tool suite is capable of in terms of, either be it markup production, CSS, JavaScript, whatever you're using it for. But then you also have to marry that with the mechanisms in AEM. Are you using client libraries? Are you using the static design mechanisms? Or are you, what I don't like to see is completely divorcing yourself from the best practices or the established patterns in AEM for the sake of the front-end build process.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that from time to time when reviewing projects that will happen, especially in the front end, that there's no client libraries. There's a completely separate process for building out the front end that has nothing to do with AEM. And I always wonder, when you want to move that project into the mobile space, into the responsive space, onto screens, how much is really reusable, and are you not taking advantage of the modularity of AEM? I think that comes up quite a bit. And I think as AEM matures more, you're gonna, because it's becoming more of a turnkey solution, you're going to have to adhere more to the AEM standards, but you don't want to give up all the flexibility that you need to create a robust front end.
Right.
So I would guess that will be a challenge over the next couple releases, is to find that happy balance.
Yeah.
Because you do find from time to time people, especially on the front end side of things, trying to use frameworks for the sake of using that framework.
Right.
There's no reason.
That's a whole nother problem.
Well, yeah, but I mean but it plays into all of a sudden you have this you have this entire infrastructure for the front end that is unnecessary and doesn't follow any of the AEM conventions, like you said. But it leads to bigger problems when that needs to be ported to other versions of AEM or to other products within the piece.
Right.
Once you want to add target in there, you really need to be using something that's compatible with AEM and AEM's authoring, so that you can give an author context when they're setting up targeting.
Right.
And so if they cannot render their page because it's so dynamic and it's doing everything asynchronously, you might run into a problem once you want targeted content, say.
Yeah.
That, and things like that, I think, are challenges that will come up more and more as, for one, in the Adobe landscape, everything's getting more integrated. But also, digital authors are expecting their sites to use more targeting and better analytics and things that aren't necessarily concerns of the front end, but certainly can be affected by the decisions made in the front end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful.
Well, I think we crushed it, gentlemen.
Yeah, man.
I think we have
Exhausted.
beaten this horse into a pulp.
We have got to the core.
So this is a problem that I don't feel like I have a great solution for inside of AEM. We've
We know, that's why you're here.